Trainee pilot, maintain training parameters. This is not a combat mission. The voice of Colonel Mitchell crackled through Second Lieutenant Gianna Phillips's helmet as she guided her F-22 Raptor through what was supposed to be a routine systems familiarization flight over the Nevada desert. 25 years old, 8 months into the most advanced fighter pilot training program in the world, and everyone saw her the same way. Promising but unproven, talented but untested, smart, but still just a trainee learning to fly the most sophisticated stealth fighter ever built. What they didn't know, what nobody at Edwards Air Force Base knew, was that Gianna Phillips had been hiding the depth of her tactical knowledge for months, studying every aspect of air-to-ground warfare, mastering weapon systems far beyond her training level, preparing for a moment that wasn't supposed to come during a training flight. But when 50 enemy armored vehicles crossed into American airspace in broad daylight, when every other aircraft was too far away to respond, when a full enemy division threatened to establish a foothold on American soil, Gianna did something that would redefine what the Air Force thought was possible from a trainee pilot. She turned her F-22 Raptor into a tank-hunting predator and proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the sky is the one nobody expects to be lethal. Second Lieutenant Gianna Phillips ran through her pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision that had earned her a reputation as one of the most thorough trainees in the F-22 program at Edwards Air Force Base. At 25, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style and green eyes that missed nothing, she'd been flying the Raptor for 8 months, long enough to be competent, not long enough to be trusted with anything more challenging than training exercises. The F-22 Raptor was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, a fifth-generation stealth fighter capable of speeds exceeding Mach 2, equipped with sensors that could track targets at ranges beyond 100 miles, and armed with weapon systems that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. It was also the most expensive fighter ever built, which meant trainees like Gianna were watched very carefully and given very limited operational freedom. "Phillips, you're cleared for training area Bravo 7, came the voice of Colonel Richard Mitchell, her flight commander, over the radio. "Systems familiarization only. No live weapons, no aggressive maneuvering, no deviations from flight plan. This is not Top Gun, Lieutenant. Stay in your lane." "Roger, sir. Training area Bravo 7. Systems familiarization only," Gianna replied. But inside, she was chafing at the restrictions. She'd been staying in her lane for 8 months, flying conservative training flights while studying advanced combat tactics in her spare time, learning everything she could about the F-22's full capabilities. What Colonel Mitchell and the other instructors didn't know was that Gianna had been preparing for real combat since the day she'd first climbed into a Raptor cockpit. She'd studied every air-to-ground engagement in modern warfare, had memorized the performance specifications of enemy armor systems, had practiced weapons deployment scenarios on flight simulators far beyond her official training requirements. She wasn't just learning to fly the F-22, she was learning to fight in it. But today was supposed to be another routine training flight, 2 hours of systems checks, basic maneuvers, and instrument familiarization over the empty Nevada desert. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, nothing that would require the combat skills she'd been secretly developing. That assumption lasted exactly 47 minutes. Gianna was at 35,000 feet, running through radar system diagnostics, when her threat warning display lit up like a Christmas tree. Multiple contacts, approaching fast from the north, broadcasting electronic signatures that didn't match any American or Allied aircraft. "Control, this is Raptor 2-1. I'm showing multiple unknown contacts bearing 010, range 60 miles and closing. Can you confirm?" There was a pause. Then Colonel Mitchell's voice came back tense and urgent. 2-1, we're seeing them too. Count 50-plus armored vehicles crossing the border at high speed. This is not a drill, Phillips. You are ordered to maintain safe distance and provide reconnaissance only. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Gianna's blood ran cold. 50 armored vehicles meant a full enemy division. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, mobile artillery, air defense systems. An invasion force large enough to establish a significant foothold on American soil if it wasn't stopped immediately. "Control, where's the nearest combat aircraft?" she asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. "Nearest F-15 squadron is 20 minutes out. Nearest a 10 ground attack aircraft are 35 minutes. We're scrambling everything we have, but you're the only American aircraft in position." 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, 50 enemy armored vehicles could penetrate deep into American territory, establish defensive positions, and become exponentially harder to dislodge. By the time the cavalry arrived, the tactical situation would have shifted dramatically in the enemy's favor. Gianna looked at her weapons display. Officially, she was flying a training mission with no live ordnance. But the F-22's internal weapons bay contained something the instructors had forgotten about: a full load of GBU-39 small-diameter bombs left over from a previous training exercise and never removed. 12 precision-guided bombs, each capable of destroying an armored vehicle, each with a range of over 60 miles. "Control, confirm I am to maintain reconnaissance only." "Affirmative, 2-1. Reconnaissance only. You are a trainee pilot on a training aircraft. You are not authorized for combat operations." Gianna made a decision that would either end her career or make her famous. "Control, I'm experiencing radio difficulties. Switching to backup frequency for systems check." She switched to an unused frequency, effectively cutting communications with her controllers, and turned her F-22 toward the approaching enemy formation. The Raptor's advanced radar systems painted a clear picture of the enemy force. 47 armored vehicles in a standard invasion formation, moving at high speed across open terrain. Main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery, and mobile surface-to-air missile systems. A professional military force equipped for rapid territorial seizure. Gianna engaged the F-22's stealth systems, rendering her aircraft effectively invisible to enemy radar, and began her attack run. The small-diameter bomb was a marvel of modern weapons technology, a 250-pound precision-guided munition with a focused blast designed specifically for taking out armored vehicles without excessive collateral damage. The F-22 could carry 12 of them internally, maintaining stealth while delivering devastating firepower. Gianna selected her first target, the lead tank, a modern main battle tank that was probably directing the entire formation. Range, 42 miles. The SDB's GPS guidance would take it directly to the target with surgical precision. "Fox 3, she called out to no one, using the standard terminology for a surface attack missile, and released her first bomb. The SDB fell away from the F-22's internal weapons bay, its guidance fins extending, GPS system locking onto the target coordinates Gianna had designated. She immediately selected her second target, a mobile command vehicle that appeared to be coordinating the formation's movement. Peary Fox 3. Second bomb away. The beauty of the small-diameter bomb was that it could be programmed to arrive on target at specific intervals, creating simultaneous multiple strikes that would maximize confusion and disruption. Gianna programmed her first wave of 6 bombs to impact within a 30-second window, targeting the formation's command and control vehicles, its air defense systems, and its lead elements. She released bombs 3 through 6 in rapid succession, each one programmed for a different target, each one guided by the F-22's sophisticated targeting systems. Then, she turned for another attack run. The first bombs impacted just as Gianna was lining up her second wave of targets. Through her sensors, she watched the enemy formation explode in chaos as lead vehicles suddenly burst into flames, command posts disintegrated, and air defense systems went dark. The enemy force, which had been moving in perfect formation just moments before, scattered as individual vehicle commanders tried to understand what was happening. They were being attacked by something they couldn't see, something that was picking off their vehicles with surgical precision. Gianna selected her next 6 targets from the confused milling formation: artillery pieces, ammunition carriers, fuel trucks, the vehicles that would be hardest to replace and whose destruction would cripple the entire force. Fox 3. Fox 3, Fox 3. Bombs 7 through 9, released at precise intervals. The enemy was trying to respond, rotating their air defense systems toward the direction the bombs seemed to be coming from. But the F-22's stealth signature was so minimal that their radars couldn't get a lock. They were being destroyed by a ghost. Fox 3, Fox 3, Fox 3. Her final 3 bombs targeted at the remaining tanks and armored personnel carriers. In the span of 4 minutes, Gianna had released 12 precision-guided bombs at 12 different targets across a formation of enemy armored vehicles that had entered American airspace with hostile intent. Now came the waiting. The small-diameter bombs had a flight time of approximately 8 minutes from release to impact. Gianna used that time to circle at high altitude, her stealth systems keeping her invisible, watching through her sensors as the enemy formation continued to move forward, unaware that death was falling toward them from the sky. The second wave of impacts began at exactly the moment Gianna had calculated. 6 more vehicles exploded in rapid succession, artillery pieces erupting in secondary explosions as their ammunition cooked off, fuel trucks turning into rolling fireballs, command vehicles disintegrating as their armor was penetrated by the SDB's focused blast. The enemy formation's cohesion completely collapsed. Vehicle commanders, realizing they were under attack by an enemy they couldn't see or fight, began making individual decisions about whether to continue the advance, take defensive positions, or retreat. Most chose retreat. The third wave of impacts sealed the decision. Gianna's final 6 bombs found their targets with the same precision as the first 6, destroying the remaining tanks and heavy vehicles, leaving the enemy force scattered, burning, and effectively neutralized as a fighting unit. In 12 minutes, using 12 bombs, a trainee pilot had destroyed an entire enemy armored division. Gianna switched back to her control frequency and keyed her radio. "Control, this is Raptor 2-1. I have visual on the enemy formation. They appear to have stopped advancing." There was a long pause before Colonel Mitchell's voice came back, tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. 2-1, please clarify. What is the status of the enemy force? Sir, I count approximately 12 vehicles still mobile and retreating north. The remainder appear to be disabled. Another pause. Phillips switched to secure frequency immediately and returned to base. We need to have a conversation. The flight back to Edwards Air Force Base was the longest 25 minutes of Gianna's life. She knew she was going to face serious consequences for what she'd done, engaging enemy forces without authorization, using weapons on a training mission, deviating from flight plan, ignoring direct orders. Any one of those violations could end her career. All of them together probably meant court-martial. But as she guided her F-22 toward the runway, she also knew she'd done the right thing. 50 enemy armored vehicles had crossed into American airspace with obvious hostile intent. She'd been the only American asset in position to respond. She'd stopped an invasion before it could establish itself on American soil. The question was whether the Air Force would see it the same way. Colonel Mitchell was waiting for her when she climbed down from the F-22's cockpit. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not pleased, just intensely focused. "Lieutenant Phillips, you're confined to quarters pending investigation. You will speak to no one about what happened today until you've been debriefed by intelligence personnel. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. And Phillips?" "Sir?" "How many weapons did you expend?" Gianna met his eyes steadily. "All of them, sir. 12 SDBS, 12 targets, 12 hits." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Follow me. There are some people who want to speak with you." The debriefing lasted 6 hours and involved more senior officers than Gianna had ever seen in one room. The base commander, intelligence officers, representatives from the Pentagon, and several people whose titles and affiliations weren't mentioned. They went through every second of her mission, analyzing her targeting decisions, her weapons employment, her tactical approach to engaging a superior ground force. They reviewed the F-22's sensor data, the bomb damage assessment, and the intelligence reports about the enemy force she'd engaged. Finally, a general she didn't recognize asked the question she'd been dreading. "Lieutenant Phillips, you directly disobeyed orders to maintain reconnaissance only and not engage. You used weapons on what was supposed to be a training flight. You cut communications with your controllers." Why? Gianna had been thinking about her answer for hours. Sir, I had 50 enemy armored vehicles in American airspace, moving at high speed toward populated areas. I had the weapons and the capability to stop them before they could establish defensive positions. No other American assets were in position to respond in time. I made a tactical decision that stopping an invasion was more important than following training protocols. And you felt qualified to make that decision as a trainee pilot? Sir, I felt obligated to make that decision as an American officer who had sworn an oath to defend this country against all enemies. The general was quiet for a moment, then looked at the other officers in the room. Gentlemen, could you give us the room for a moment? When they were alone, the general leaned forward. Lieutenant Phillips, what you did today was either gross insubordination deserving of court-martial or exceptional initiative deserving of commendation. The difference depends on one question. How did you know you could pull it off? Gianna took a deep breath. Sir, I've been studying air-to-ground tactics since the day I started F-22 training. I know the capabilities of the SDB, the performance characteristics of modern armor, the principles of precision strike warfare. I've run similar scenarios hundreds of times in simulation. Why? This wasn't part of your training curriculum. Because I wanted to be ready, sir. I wanted to know what the F-22 could really do if I ever had to use it in combat. Today, I found out. The general smiled. The first smile Gianna had seen from anyone all day. Lieutenant, do you know what the intelligence assessment says about the enemy force you engaged? No, sir. They were the advance guard of a much larger force. If they'd been allowed to establish a foothold in American territory, we would have faced a full-scale invasion within hours. Your decision to engage them probably prevented a war. Gianna felt relief wash over her, followed immediately by a new kind of nervousness. Sir, what happens now? Now, Lieutenant Phillips, you're going to get a crash course in what the Air Force does with pilots who demonstrate exceptional combat judgment and tactical innovation. He stood up. You're being transferred to the 94th Fighter Squadron. Congratulations, you're no longer a trainee. Sir? The 94th flies combat missions, Lieutenant, real ones, and after what you demonstrated today, we need pilots who can think tactically under pressure, who can adapt to unexpected situations, and who can employ the F-22's full capabilities when it matters most. 3 weeks later, First Lieutenant Gianna Phillips, promoted ahead of schedule, stood in the briefing room of the 94th Fighter Squadron, listening to her new squadron commander explain her first real combat mission. Phillips, you'll be flying air superiority over a contested area where we've received reports of enemy air activity. Your job is to establish air dominance and eliminate any hostile aircraft that attempt to enter the operational area. Yes, sir. This isn't a training flight, Lieutenant. This is real-world combat. Think you can handle it? Gianna thought about the 12 small-diameter bombs that had stopped an armored invasion, about the tactical decisions she'd made without authorization, about the moment when a trainee pilot had become something else entirely. Sir, I'm ready. Her squadron commander smiled. I know you are. That's why you're here. As Gianna walked toward her F-22 for her first official combat mission, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from trainee to combat pilot in the span of one unauthorized engagement. She'd spent 8 months being treated like someone who wasn't ready for real responsibility, someone who needed to be watched and guided and protected from making important decisions. Then, she'd made the most important decision of her career, and it had changed everything. The F-22 Raptor waiting for her on the flight line was the same aircraft she'd been flying for months, but now she was authorized to use its full capabilities. All of them. The weapon systems she'd studied in secret, the tactics she'd practiced in simulation, the combat judgment she had demonstrated over the Nevada desert. She was no longer just a trainee. She was a combat pilot flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, with the full authority to use whatever force was necessary to protect American interests. And somewhere, in intelligence briefings and tactical planning sessions, senior officers were talking about the day a trainee pilot had single-handedly stopped an armored invasion, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal isn't the biggest or the most expensive. Sometimes it's the one nobody expects to be lethal. Sometimes it's the pilot everyone thinks is just learning the systems, who knows exactly how to use those systems when lives are on the line. Sometimes it's the trainee who's been secretly preparing for combat while everyone else assumed she was just going through the motions. Gianna Phillips climbed into her F-22, ran through her pre-flight checklist with the same methodical precision she'd always used, and prepared for takeoff. But now, instead of flying training missions with restrictive parameters, she was flying combat missions with one simple rule: protect American airspace by any means necessary. The F-22 Raptor lifted off from Edwards Air Force Base with a pilot who was no longer hiding her capabilities, no longer pretending to be less than she was, no longer waiting for permission to be dangerous. The trainee was gone. In her place sat a warrior who'd learned that sometimes you don't ask for authorization to do what's right. Sometimes you just do it and let the consequences prove you were justified. The enemy armored division that had tested that philosophy was now scattered wreckage in the Nevada desert, a testament to what happens when you underestimate the pilot everyone thinks is just learning the basics. Because Gianna Phillips had never been just learning the basics. She'd been learning to win. And in the F-22 Raptor, with 12 precision weapons and the most advanced stealth technology in the world, winning looked a lot like making enemy threats disappear before they ever knew they were being hunted. The sky belonged to her now, and everyone else was just visiting. But as Gianna prepared for takeoff on her first official combat mission, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, not just in her career, but in how the Air Force approached pilot training. Word of her unauthorized engagement had spread through classified channels, and the implications were being discussed at the highest levels of military leadership. 3 days after her transfer to the 94th Fighter Squadron, she was called to a meeting that would reshape her understanding of her role in the Air Force's future. General Patricia Morrison, commander of Air Combat Command, was waiting for her in a secure briefing room, along with several other officers whose rank insignia suggested this was a meeting that could define policy for years to come. "Lieutenant Phillips," General Morrison began, "your engagement over Nevada has raised some interesting questions about how we train and deploy our most advanced assets. I want to understand something. During your 8 months of training, did you ever feel adequately challenged?" Gianna chose her words carefully. "Ma'am, the training was comprehensive and professional, but I felt like I was only using a fraction of the aircraft's capabilities and a fraction of my own preparation." "Explain what you mean by your own preparation." "Ma'am, I spent every off-duty hour studying advanced combat tactics, weapon systems, threat assessment, and tactical decision-making. I wanted to be ready for scenarios that weren't covered in the standard curriculum." General Morrison exchanged glances with the other officers. "Lieutenant, what you did over Nevada wasn't just tactically sound, it was strategically brilliant. You identified a critical threat, assessed your capabilities, made a command decision under pressure, and executed a complex air-to-ground mission with perfect precision. That's not trainee-level performance. That's what we expect from our most experienced combat pilots." "Thank you, ma'am. But here's what concerns me. If you were capable of that level of performance, why were you still in basic training? Why weren't we utilizing your full potential months ago?" Gianna realized this wasn't just a personal evaluation, it was a systemic analysis. "Ma'am, I think the current training pipeline is designed to ensure competence rather than identify exceptional capability. It assumes every pilot needs the same foundational period regardless of their individual readiness." "And you think that's problematic?" "I think it's inefficient, ma'am. If a pilot demonstrates advanced capability early, keeping them in basic training doesn't make them safer. It makes them less prepared for the complex decisions they'll face in actual combat." General Morrison nodded. "That's exactly what we're thinking. Lieutenant Phillips, how would you feel about being involved in redesigning the F-22 training program?" Gianna blinked. "Ma'am, we're creating an advanced track for pilots who demonstrate exceptional tactical judgment and systems mastery early in their training. Accelerated progression, advanced scenarios, real-world decision-making under pressure. We want pilots who can think like you did over Nevada, not just follow procedures, but adapt and innovate when the situation demands it. Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm barely qualified to be in combat myself, let alone train others. Lieutenant, you just prevented an invasion. I think your qualifications speak for themselves. General Morrison pulled out a folder. This is a new program we're calling the Raptor Advanced Combat Track, RACT. Pilots who demonstrate exceptional capability will be fast-tracked through advanced training, given real-world scenarios, and prepared for immediate combat deployment. We want you to be our test case. Gianna opened the folder and found herself looking at a training curriculum that was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Advanced threat assessment, multi-domain warfare, tactical innovation under uncertainty, command decision-making. Courses designed not just to create competent pilots, but to develop warrior scholars who could adapt to any situation. Ma'am, this looks like a program for senior officers, not lieutenants. That's because we're realizing that in modern warfare, junior officers often find themselves in senior decision-making roles. When you were alone over that enemy formation, you weren't a trainee. You were the senior American military presence in the area. You had to think and act like a commander, and you did. We need to train pilots for that reality from the beginning. Over the following months, Gianna found herself in a unique position. By day, she flew combat missions with the 94th Fighter Squadron, using her F-22 to establish air superiority in contested regions around the world. By night, she worked with Air Combat Command to develop the RACT program, designing scenarios that would challenge future pilots the way her unauthorized engagement had challenged her. The program attracted attention from across the military. Special Operations Command wanted input on how to integrate F-22s into unconventional warfare. Navy and Marine aviation leaders wanted to understand how the principles could apply to their own advanced aircraft. Even the Army was interested in how the tactical decision-making frameworks could enhance their officer development. 6 months after her transfer from trainee to combat pilot, First Lieutenant Gianna Phillips found herself briefing a room full of generals and admirals on the future of military aviation training. The traditional model assumes that experience equals capability, she explained, standing before a screen showing training progression charts. But what we learned is that in modern warfare, capability can exceed experience if the pilot has the right foundation and the right decision-making framework. The question isn't how long someone has been flying. It's whether they can think tactically under pressure and adapt to situations that weren't in the manual. Admiral Sarah Chen, Chief of Naval Operations, raised her hand. Lieutenant, how do we assess that kind of capability without putting aircraft and pilots at risk? Bonner DTD. Ma'am, we create training scenarios that are as complex and unpredictable as real combat, but in controlled environments. We put pilots in situations where they have to make command decisions, not just follow procedures. We test their judgment under stress, their ability to innovate when standard tactics don't apply, their capacity to think strategically while executing tactically. And you think this approach will produce better combat pilots? Gianna thought about that day over Nevada, about the weight of decision in those crucial moments, about the satisfaction of seeing a plan work perfectly under the most challenging circumstances. Ma'am, I think this approach will produce pilots who are ready for whatever comes next, whether that's stopping an invasion, establishing air supremacy, or adapting to threats we haven't imagined yet. The goal isn't just to create good pilots, it's to create pilots who can be great when greatness is required. The room was quiet for a moment, as the senior leaders absorbed the implications. General Morrison spoke first. Lieutenant Phillips, the RACT program has been approved for full implementation across Air Combat Command. You'll be leading the development team while continuing your operational duties. Congratulations, you've just created the future of fighter pilot training. As the meeting concluded and the senior officers filed out, General Morrison approached Gianna privately. Lieutenant, when you made that decision over Nevada, You probably thought you were just stopping an enemy advance, but you were actually demonstrating a new model of military leadership, junior officers who can think and act with strategic perspective when the situation demands it. That's not something we can teach in a classroom. It's something we have to recognize and nurture when we see it. Ma'am, I was just doing what seemed necessary at the time. That's exactly my point. You didn't wait for permission to do what was necessary. You assessed the situation, determined what success looked like, and executed a plan to achieve it. That's not trainee thinking. That's commander thinking. And we need more officers who can think like commanders from the moment they pin on their wings. Gianna realized that her unauthorized engagement over Nevada had become something larger than she'd ever intended. It hadn't just saved American lives or prevented an invasion. It had sparked a fundamental re-examination of how the military developed its leaders. Ma'am, what do you think would have happened if I'd followed orders and maintained reconnaissance only? General Morrison's expression grew serious. Lieutenant, intelligence analysis suggests that enemy force was the advance guard for a much larger invasion. If they'd established their foothold and called in reinforcements, we would have faced a ground war on American soil for the first time since the War of 1812. Your decision to engage didn't just stop an invasion. It prevented a war. The weight of that realization settled on Gianna's shoulders. She thought she was making a tactical decision in the moment. Instead, she'd been making a strategic decision that had altered the course of history. Ma'am, how do we prepare future pilots for that level of responsibility? That's what the RACT program is about, Lieutenant. We stop treating junior officers like they're too inexperienced for serious decisions, and we start training them for the reality that in modern warfare, serious decisions often fall to whoever is in position when the critical moment arrives. As Gianna left the Pentagon and flew back to Edwards Air Force Base, she reflected on the journey from trainee pilot to combat leader to architect of the future. She'd spent 8 months being told she wasn't ready for real responsibility. Now, she was shaping how the Air Force would prepare its pilots for the next generation of warfare. The F-22 Raptor she'd flown over Nevada was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. But the real weapon that had stopped the invasion wasn't the aircraft or its precision bombs. It was the pilot who'd been prepared to use them when authorization never came and time was running out. She'd learned something that would reshape military training for decades. Sometimes the most dangerous combination in any military is advanced technology operated by someone who refuses to wait for permission to do what's right. The trainee who'd destroyed an armored division had become the instructor who would teach others to be ready for their own moments of truth. Because in the end, that's what warriors do. They prepare for the moment when everything depends on their decision, their skill, and their willingness to act when action is required. The sky still belonged to her, but now it would belong to everyone she trained to claim it. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.